I've got two hats really in most conversations. One I work for Bangor University in central services IT building stuff for a living, but one day a week these days I play around with other stuff, which is mainly to do with community building or advocating for the tech sector in North Wales, and that's where the crossover really comes with Chris. We both worked for Bangor, or I think you were a PhD student at the time, Chris. Both were at Bangor University, and we're both sort of passionate about the technology sector for different reasons. And this is Chris. Giving a talk at one of our very first events. So I thought I'd put that in as a beginner. I'm going to switch between a couple of tabs here. So hopefully you'll be able to see the sort of title slide I've got here, which is trying to get students and industry to interact. It didn't really start that way. It's more a case of trying to foster a community in the tech sector in North Wales, but I'll get to that in a minute. But as a first point, how did anybody get into the thing that they're passionate about? So, some people would put a picture up of a Commodore 64 or a Sinclair Spectrum, or they might have a particular book that they, if they're in the literary side of things. And that's one thing I want to get back to at the end of this, is how do people get into things, and why are they interested in that particular topic that they're interested in? This one is actually the very first Apple computer, before they actually started selling them. And its origin is back here in the Homebrew Computer Club. Over in, well, there you go, the address is there, in Mountain View, California, and the two people in that photo are Steve Wozniak and Steve Jobs. And that particular device there was made really to show off to his bunch of friends in his local computing club. And that's where this is really coming from. We wanted to create our own little sort of computer club, if you like, in North Wales. But it's interesting that the main reason for these people producing this is to show off, it's the kudos, if you like, the camaraderie and banter side of things is really important in this. Eventually, those two came up with this. They produced the first Apple II. Arguably, Steve Wozniak made the insides, he made the techie bit, but Steve Jobs made the casing, but more importantly, defined the product. There's one thing to build the thing that makes that works, the innards of something, but then you have to convert it into a product. And that's another sort of theme that I think is important in what I'm going to talk about. My particular path, there's a few possible origins to it, but I think I've really sort of clicked into computing as opposed to medicine or architecture that were probably on the list at the time. Back when this film came out, Hackers, that's Angelina Jolie on the right there. And that got me into two things. One led to my first sort of PC that I got into, coding away, teaching myself how to write code. And it also got me to rollerblading for my sins. But I'll come back to that. What I want to talk about today is the tech community that we built. And I'll come back to sort of some of the lessons learned as we go along. And this is the usual slide deck I use. And we're talking about sort of develop a community for all of North Wales. A bit unusual in that we span all of the counties. We've done events in literally all of the counties. Last year, we were over in Bangor here on the left and in Wrexham every month for the entire year, which is a lot of traveling backwards and forwards. But the motivation is to sort of normalize, if you like, that you can have a tech sector somewhere like this. Very pretty place. That's just down the road from me now. Chris probably recognizes that. Do you know where that is, Chris?
That is Aber Falls.
That is Aber Falls. Beautiful place down the road from us. And it's not something you might think happens in rural areas that have a strong tech sector. Some numbers for you. We've done about 90 events over 5 years. 5 years old in December. Heading for 800, 900 members now. And what we do is sort of advocate for what we find, what we see in the sector. More strategically, is dealing with this kind of issue, the brain drain retention and returners issue that a rural area will have. You've got a bit of the Dick Whittington syndrome. People think that they have to leave or never come back to areas to be successful. There's some irony here. Good example of this. My next door neighbours, 3 sons. One of them went to Bristol, did a master's and is doing aeronautical engineering. Well, these days he's working for Airbus, designing aircraft. The other 2 went to Oxford and Cambridge. Ironically, all 3 of them are back now during COVID lockdown. So they have come back to North Wales and remote working, having been away to, tread their trade elsewhere. But all 3 have shown an interest in coming back, which is an interesting point. We're very much about different skills and different experience levels. And we do two types of things, really. We do tech talks. This is our very first one back in December in 2015. And that is Glyn down the bottom, remote controlling his Christmas tree from the lecture theatre. That was held in the computer science department in Bangor University. And in that audience, you've got mixtures of students, you've got university staff, you've got people that were students that now work in the tech sector in the local companies. And we've got a local recruitment agency to sponsor the teas and coffees and mince pies. So that's one of the type of events we do, lots of those. The other type of event we do, which is a bit unique for these kind of groups, is hands-on. So that was the very first hands-on workshop in our new innovation centre way back 4 years or so ago. Ironically, there's no students in that picture. They're all people that work in the sector. Half of them have been students in Bangor University at some point. I'm not going to go through the rest of the talk. I'm just going to pick out a few things sort of on the way. We've got people that used to work for Google to come along and do talks for us. Again, I'm looking at the audiences from the point of view of this talk. There's a handful of students there. I'm not going to identify them. You're starting to see 2 or 3 students coming along to an event there. We've interacted with Code Club. Code Club Wales representative Adam at the front there. This audience picture is one of my favourites. 1/3 of that audience are teachers. 1/3 of that audience are people that work in the sector, professionals, 5, 10, 15 years or so. The other third are a mixture of enthusiasts and random other people. But the interesting thing is why the teachers are there. The teachers were there because they wanted to rub shoulders with the developers to learn how to teach how to do computer science. They were, by their own admission, a bit nervous of admitting that they didn't feel comfortable. They didn't want to look for the training, formal training routes. They were really keen, really appreciative of coming along to rub shoulders with professionals and learn the nitty gritty of something in that kind of informal setting. We've had that a few times actually over the years. We've been around, we've picked up some sort of interesting, just on the left is the interesting one here. That's Anthony, who self-taught himself the skills to build the harp, the woodworking skills. That's overlap with Chris again. He then wired it up to some solenoids so it could self-play. So it's a self-playing harp, self-taught entirely, Ant here. So you've got a self-playing harp, and he's got a compressor hidden behind that desk to play the wood organ that's next to it as well. So random stuff like that. We made a point of getting real good mixtures of things into the talks, no more than 20 minutes each, 15, 20 minutes. I'll come back to the format comments later. We got well-known companies in the sector to sponsor us. So all of us that were demonstrating in this one. We've got Docker t-shirts. Docker's a few years ago was an up-and-coming sort of poster child of the Silicon Valley, if you like. So we interacted with companies like that and got them to send sponsorship stuff across. And similarly, we've got young people that work in the industry here to actually run events, and you get maybe a quarter of the audience at most turn out to be students. This one's interesting. Middle of nowhere, Porthmadog, very, very rural. We still get 30 people coming along. This is 2 people speaking here. Started up their own game studio in the back of Beyond, and they managed to get it out there and sold on to the games platforms. We did other things. This is a very different kind of audience, lots of suits in this one. This is a tech business sector sort of interaction that we did down the road, halfway along the North Wales coast, about 40 minutes from me here. The interesting thing is here, we managed to twist the arms of the students over in Glendower University that were doing the games design course and got them to put a stall up outside. We literally twisted the arm of a couple of Bangor University students, chucked them in the car, gave them a lift to the event, and in the breaks they were sort of mingling with the people, helping them make introductions. So we're actually doing hands-on, sort of dragging people by the coattails, if you like, to these kinds of events that they would probably not otherwise go to. Massive imposter syndrome issues with some of these. Similarly, did a similar thing over here in the Bangor University's science park. Again, we gave them lifts. We helped students that didn't have a lift find a lift from their friends or people they didn't know, and we made a point of dragging them to these events. I'll come back to that particular one, the science park, later. Similarly, we helped them we encouraged them to participate in MakeFest in Liverpool a few years ago. That's an hour and a half away from us here. One corner, the most popular exhibit on the stand was the Students' Makerspace Society at Bangor University that made these little battling bots. So every single child that came through wanted to know more about it. And the students were there having to answer these little children's questions. This is the kind of nurturing and in at the deep end kind of approach we've used to this in the nicest possible way. I won't go into, there's a few other random things like interacting with local farmers, again, taking the students with us. That is a lecturer from Aberystwyth University teaching a bunch of farmers how to build Arduino soil sensors. But again, we encourage the students to come with us. Same event, this is a self-driving tractor and some computer vision work that one of the local farmers / engineers / AI enthusiasts got into. I think you're finding a pattern here. This one's a similar event, workshop event. On the left here, you have a teacher and his son. They actually won the challenge of the evening, which is to build something on the Raspberry Pi, but you weren't allowed to use a keyboard or a mouse. You had to sort of blindly make it do something, plug it in and see if it worked. And on the right here, you'll see the closest table to you there are predominantly students from Bangor University. The other one is as well, they were actually, looking a bit closer, they had settled as two separate tables, one bunch of students, one bunch of industry professionals. So we deliberately mixed them up. And then they spent the rest of the evening working on a common challenge. And by the end of it, they got to know each other. I think there's at least one person there I can think of that actually ended up with a job that you could trace back to that event. Chris mentioned rockets. This is Joe, our local rockets enthusiast, teaching a bunch of people. There are one or two students in that picture. How to design rockets. We're not sticking to boring computer science, sort of sitting in front of the code, looking at text. We're making it more dynamic and more interesting. Lots of very topics. I'll show you two more from this collection. This is a local ham radio group, very stereotyped, sort of wrongly, in my opinion, group of people that run the sort of ham radio clubs. And they came along and helped us transmit the North Wales Tech logo from one side of the room to the other over analog radio signals. So again, if you look closer, there's a bunch of students over here somewhere. I won't put them out. Mixing with a local radio club and a bunch of local professional in the sector. Code jams, similar point of view. Turn up, have a common challenge, mix the group up. At the end, do a retrospective. They're all kind of analysing in this picture on the bottom left here, analysing what we did, tearing it apart. So people getting used to sort of professional style critique of work, which is very different to what they may be used to in the classroom. Something completely different. We brought art into this. This particular piece of work was take two pieces of artwork or two images, smash them through a piece of AI software and make something new out of the back end of it. This one we did in a very particular way. We had three different versions of the same challenge that evening. One of them that you could do a pointy clicky on a website, no code and sites, and people that had no experience whatsoever could produce the same output. But then we had two other versions of it. One which was sort of in the middle. If you knew what you were doing, you could crack on and get your hands dirty a bit. And then we also had a much more in-depth one where you're on your own. But people were sitting next to each other doing the same activity in essence, but in three different ways, but producing the same output. So they had a common theme of aesthetic appreciation that they could use to sort of ground their conversations, even though they were in different worlds in terms of what they were doing. One more here. So this is a collaboration I did with Ant, who I mentioned earlier, the person that was building their organ, and local artist. And what you're seeing in that photo is the text on the right wall. Each color corresponds to a person. And what it's actually doing is intercepting the Wi-Fi traffic from their mobile phones. Whichever headline, a bit like the reduction, actually, in some respects, condensing. It's extracting the headlines of every web page you go to, so the headers in the web page, and showing them up on the text as a different color, intercepting them. So lots of GDPR and privacy issues galore trying to get this one out the door. And then on the left, those words popping out are the ones that I think the left wall was anything that matched the NSA watch list. So this supposed list that if you use these words, you're sort of flagged in the ether of surveillance. And then on the other wall, we had the GCHQ watch list. So these are ideas from the artist that we helped implement, but that was actually exhibited in the university in the big white room they have there. Lots and lots of issues getting that through the door. That's another talk in its own right, but it was very interactive and very artistic. So we made sure that every student society that could possibly have an interest in this knew about it. So we helped them get there and make sure that they were sort of aware. I think we opened it especially for students one day as well. Anyway, that's kind of what we've been doing. Back to the sort of talk now, or the main sort of analysis of what went on. It was very much a case of try again, very much a brute force approach of throw enough stuff and something might stick. To use a software engineering term, lots of refactoring, rethinking what happened along the way, reevaluating what did and didn't work as we went along the way. So, you start thinking, how am I going to get students to come along? Well, you dangle a carrot in front of them and say, skills and jobs, this is important for you. It turned out first year students aren't really thinking that far in many respects. That's not what got them there. Third year students, definitely, that's towards the sort of second half of their year, maybe if towards the end of a year, if they're looking for internships and summer placements, you can use that carrot. That's what we found. Some liked the idea, some would go for it, other ones not so much. The other one was sort of playing on the heartstrings a bit, telling you need to come along. There's good projects that you can get involved in. Try and guilt trip them a little bit, perhaps. That's maybe not the right politically correct term, but that kind of approach, sort of trying enthusiasm to make them feel wanted and needed. Probably seen the next slide now. The thing that worked best was actually to give them free pizza. There's one event in particular. If I go to our past events, I'll show you the picture later. We split the event into two, had a pizza break in the middle, and I took a photo of the audience before and after, so for the first half and for the second half. And after we gave them the pile of pizza, you could actually see a noticeable drop. 1/3 of the audience went away. So there's lessons for us to learn there that we're still trying to work to make sense of. Another thing that we really found was really important is actually to encourage people to take photos. So if you look at our meetup site, I'll show you that in a second. We made a point within the first 3 events. We realized it was so important to get the photos done so people could see what was going on, get an impression of what it was like to be there to help break through this imposter syndrome wall, if you like. We're still having issues with this. Very often, we did an Ada Lovelace event recently, and Emily, that helped me arrange that, pointed out that if you've got photos of predominantly a male-based audience, people not going to, women not going to feel like they're going to be part of that group because they can't identify with anybody in that group in the same way. So that's a challenge for us. We're still working on that one. I mentioned style of talks. Well, a few years ago, I was involved in this, running 2 TEDx events in Holyhead, and they're very, very specific, very rigid in their formats. 18 minutes, strict. Don't beat about the bush. Get to the point. Ideas worth sharing is their tagline. A few years later, Bangor University, second from the right there, James, he wanted to set up a TEDx event for Bangor University. Very interesting interaction with him. He was adamant he was going to do it all himself and knew what he was doing at the beginning. Within a few weeks, he realized it was much bigger than he thought. And by the evening, he was after as much help as he could possibly get his hands on. It was very fascinating for me getting involved in that, but given how much of hard work we'd put into the previous 2 we'd done. But the best bit of the entire evening for me was when he stood up at the end and said, I'm really appreciative of all these people that have helped me. He admitted to the audience as a whole, which is why I can tell you the story. I thought I could do this all by myself at the beginning, and I've learned, a massive lesson in that going ahead. The important point from the point of view of this talk is we supported him. You know, we didn't care that none of our names were mentioned. It was a case of it's really important to give them the space to run with these ideas and support them. A few sort of ideas of the kinds of imagery, flyers, artwork that we put in. You know, we're deliberately kind of using a particular accessible style, throwing stuff together. This is another one. We interacted with some very, very big companies. This is Money Supermarket down the road from us. So we're identifying with imagery and notions that people will recognize and using that in the marketing materials. Marketing is so important to this, to try and get people to come along. I mentioned the science park earlier, and this really kind of captures one of the issues that we're still battling. We had a 2-day event with Microsoft, and in the evening we ran our sort of North Wales textile informal events, and tried to get as many students to come along as we could. This was one of those where I was at the venue all day. At the end of the formal part of the day, got in the car, travelled the 15 minutes to Bangor, filled it with students. I managed to get 2 of the students to give a whole pile of other people a lift, got them back over here. And I asked them in the car on the way, so how many of you have been to the Bangor University Science Park before? One out of 3 cars actually turned out to have been there before. So I asked them another question, who knows that we have a science park? And actually it was still less than a third. I've had asked similar questions of other universities as well. Don't assume that your students know everything about your institution. It's astonishing what they don't know about their institution. I didn't use half of Edinburgh University. I was there. Don't think I set foot in the library because my course didn't really need that. We had information elsewhere. Wary of time now. So it's very much a case of hands-on, random experimentation and sort of adapting as we go along. And that's the kind of story I wanted to get across here. You know, and picking out the elements of an activity that may not be the most formally academic. It's the one that's the least sensible is probably the best one to pick out. So I've got an example here. We ran a year-long activity with local science park and one of the social enterprise companies here to dabble around with Internet of Things devices for a year. All sorts of things like sensors on sheep and gates in the national park, and this activity is still growing. It's extended past that. So we filled the room with people and equipment. This one on the right here is a rain sensor that'll tell you, how much rainfall you've had. But actually, the kinds of activities that really gets people's attention is take a transmitter to the top of Snowdon and see how far you can get it to go. So we managed to get it to go all the way to Northern Ireland and the Isle of Man and even the Lake District. This is actually designed to only go maybe 10 kilometers. So that first sort of little cloud from the blue dot. And it's only as powerful as a car key fob. You wouldn't do this in practice. It's a ridiculous thing to try from a point of view of building anything sensible, but it's the one that got the attention. Massive social media coverage, lots of sort of buzz around the social media around this, but that's the one that got the attention. I just want to mention this in passing. We ran an event last week, collaboration with the Science Park again, Ada Lovelace Day. I'll jump to that slide. This is the kind of speaker lineup we had. This is fantastic. This is 5, one of these is an undergraduate at Cardiff University. One of these is a PhD student at Bangor University. 2 of them are ex-students. And then we've got a professor emeritus here who's OBE, I think, Shan Hope. Fantastic range of speakers. And, this is the kind of issue we're trying to deal with here. Uptake of computer science over the years with a theory that is something to do with the way that video games are marketed back in the 80s. And these are the kind of challenges we're trying to take on, but we're taking them head on. I'll finish with this one. This is what I want to get to. I want to put a Wi-Fi transmitter in a field, fill it with tents and have a weekend-long hack in a field, because we've got plenty of those in North Wales. This isn't new. This is electromagnetic field. This is an event that happens in England that is already a quite established one, but I think this is the kind of festival-like crescendo that I'd like to get to eventually, and students will play a very big part in that, hopefully. Chris, over to you.
Fascinating. It was trip through memory lane, that watching some of the photos, the famous ice cream sandwich science park, and
Yeah,
yeah, no, that was really cool. So I've got a question for myself before I'll pass it over to
go
everyone
for it.
else. What do you think the principal reason is that we have this challenge getting students to interact with industry? What causes that barrier?
What's the term I'm looking for? Impedance mismatch, to use a big term. There's a difference of understanding. People, there's different language, a different mindset on either side, and people have either not experienced the other because of the students, or they've forgotten it. If you ask somebody in industry what it was like as a student, they'll remember the pub, the beer, and whatever, but they won't remember the anxiety. They won't remember the whether they felt something was relevant. I've asked students point blank, why didn't you come? You said you were going to come. Why aren't you coming? And there's something about the wording, there's something about the imagery, there's something about the way the events are presented that doesn't make them feel like it's for them, or they're intimidated by it in one way or another. Imposter syndrome sort of comes in. But sometimes it's as simple as they didn't know it was happening. You just haven't connected to the right channels. The women one is a very good example. As soon as you get a little cluster of people that can identify with each other, and people can see that in the imagery, or word of mouth transmits that actually I went along, it wasn't scary, I felt like I belonged. It does improve, but getting the first one is quite tricky.
I think there's quite a lot of lessons there for anybody who deals with kind of courses that do rely on that kind of industry knowledge to kind of. I mean, I'm in the back of my mind, I'm thinking of some of the stuff that Helen does, especially around the criminology side. And I think there's some really interesting kind of synergies there. Does anybody have any questions for Carwyn?